In the name of the living God, who is Blessed Trinity. Amen. Mountains, or at least I believe so, can be sacred places. There's so much that can happen in your own life as you begin your ascent up a mountain, once you get to the peak, and even as you come back down. Hills can function in some of the same way, and it doesn't even have to be big hills, especially if you're a little kid. When I was in elementary school at Nelson Elementary in Fresno, California, there was one day in which my teacher strongly encouraged me to wait outside for the rest of class. So I sat outside, in our hallways at Nelson Elementary were outside. So as you sat outside, you looked out and saw the rest of creation. So as I sat outside one day, I looked across the street from our school, and there was an apartment complex being built. And they had brought in a huge pile of dirt. Or at least for a little kid, it seemed like a dirt mountain. So, of course, it needed to be explored. So I had it in my mind when school was over, I was going to go across the street and play on that dirt mountain. But I recalled my parents' instructions to my brothers and I, whenever school was out, we were supposed to gather our things and walk the few blocks home. We weren't supposed to mess around. But I thought, hey, it's a dirt mountain. If there was ever a day that warranted doing something you weren't supposed to do, this was it. So I did, and got all the way to the top, only to look down in the street right by the school. My dad drives up in his car. That was really a surprise because his work shift was 2 p.m. to 12 p.m. or 12 a.m., and I never did hear why he was home that day, other than he was driving by and he said, "Why don't you get in the car with me?" And all he said was, "Just be careful because someone is always watching." Well, mountains figure quite often in the Scriptures. And today, on this last Sunday after the Epiphany, our gospel lesson takes place up on the mountain. And every year before, the Sunday before we begin Lent, we have the retelling of the transfiguration of Jesus. What a remarkable sight that Jesus is transfigured in dazzling white. And somehow Moses and Elijah are there with him. I can only imagine what it would be like to have been Peter, James, or John and witness all of this. But Peter's impulse was always to speak up first. And he said, "God, Jesus, this is so amazing. Let me build 3 dwellings. In a sense, let me do something so we can stay up here on the mountain. So I can hold on to you and not let you go. Maybe we can contain this glory, and nothing ever has to change." And it's at that moment our lesson tells us that a voice in the cloud was heard saying, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And it seems the men's response was the one I am quite certain mine would have been had I been on that mountain. And had I heard that voice out of the cloud, it would have been to collapse in fear. That the fear is so overwhelming, it paralyzes your body. You can't even stand up. You just fall down. But it's at this moment that Jesus speaks. These men collapse with fear, and I wonder, as in a few days we begin Lent with Ash Wednesday. A rhythm and a cycle we participate in year after year. But Lent is a hard season. Things change in the church. Just visually it looks different. It sounds different. Many will adopt some sort of discipline that you'll either give up something or adopt some new practice. And it's hard lessons that we hear, that we know Lent moves. The first week or so, it's kind of something new. It's a little exciting. But by week 3 or 4, that discipline starts feeling heavy and seems old. We get to Holy Week, and we get the long Passion narrative on Palm Sunday. And try as we might, we can't figure out how to get away with not having to go through Good Friday. We have to go with Jesus to the cross. That's a little fearful. And yet in our gospel lessons, it's Jesus who says, "Get up and do not be afraid." To those men, but perhaps to all of us too, we need to hear those words. Do not be afraid to get up. Even with what seems to be piling so heavy upon us in life, that all we want to do is maybe crawl into a hole and just stay there. Jesus is saying, get up. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to listen to the hard lessons of Jesus, to the lessons where he foretells what's going to happen, why he must go to Jerusalem. Don't be afraid to listen to Jesus to say what's going on in our lives is not right. Don't be afraid to confess. Don't be afraid to say, God, I'm sorry. Or to our loved ones, I'm sorry. Don't be afraid to listen. Don't be afraid to get up and go down the mountain with Jesus. Knowing the Bible lessons of what will happen when Jesus goes down that mountain, when he goes to Jerusalem. Don't be afraid to journey with Jesus through Lent, through the beginning of ashes, reminding us of our own humanity. Don't be afraid to follow Jesus into mission, even when that mission is new or unexpected and we don't know how it's going to work out. Don't be afraid to get up and follow Jesus. Don't be afraid. Let me end with some words I found this week that have captured my imagination, and so I wanted to share them with you. This writer is talking about this Bible lesson, and she says, the moment of transfiguration is that point at which God says to the world and to each of us, there is nothing we can do to prepare for or stand in the way of joy or sorrow. We cannot build God a monument, and we cannot keep God safe. We also cannot escape the light that God will shed on our path. We cannot escape God, Emmanuel among us. God will find us in our homes and in our workplaces. God will find us when our hearts are broken and when we discover joy. God will find us when we run away from God and when we are sitting in the middle of what seems like hell. So get up and do not be afraid. Get up. Don't be afraid to begin your Lenten journey in a couple of days. Get up. Don't be afraid to follow Jesus through life. Get up. Don't be afraid, because no matter where we go or what we face, we will never be alone. So get up and don't be afraid. Amen.